The first thing my mother-in-law said that night wasn't Merry Christmas. It was, "Your sister just bought her second car this year." Her voice carried across the long dining table like a knife sliding over glass. The crystal chandelier above us reflected in every polished fork and wine glass, making the room look warmer than it felt. Snow drifted silently beyond the tall aspen windows, soft and peaceful, nothing like the tension tightening inside my chest. Ryan smirked beside me, swirling the wine in his glass like he was enjoying a private joke. "So," he added casually, not even looking at me, "when will you finally settle down?" "Lauren." Laughter rippled around the table. Light. Effortless. As if humiliating me had become some kind of holiday tradition. I placed my wine glass down slowly, careful not to let my hand tremble. "I already did," I said quietly. "You just haven't seen the paperwork yet." The laughter died almost instantly. Not because they understood what I meant, but because they didn't. Inside my purse, resting against my palm, was a sealed envelope. Heavy. Final. Dangerous enough to tear through everything this family had spent decades building. The Whitmore mansion always looked beautiful in winter. White stone walls, towering pine trees dusted with snow, golden lights wrapped around every column. From the outside, it felt like stepping into a holiday postcard. Inside, it felt like stepping into a museum where I didn't belong. Portraits of past Whitmore men lined the hallway walls, serious faces, sharp suits, inherited confidence. Their wives appeared in smaller frames beside them, smiling politely, decorative but forgettable. I had learned early that in this family, appearances mattered more than truth. Evelyn Whitmore, my mother-in-law, thrived on that truth. She sat at the head of the table like royalty, posture perfect, expression cool and controlled. Everything about her, from the pearls around her neck to the way she lifted her glass, announced authority. Approval from her was currency. Disapproval was punishment. And I had lived under both. That night, as dishes were passed around and laughter resumed, I noticed something small that made my stomach tighten. Along the sideboard, rows of neatly wrapped Christmas gifts were labeled with elegant name tags. Ryan's name, Claire's name, even distant cousins, but not mine. Not a single gift carried my name. I forced myself to breathe slowly, steadying the familiar sting of exclusion. This wasn't new. It was just louder tonight. "Did you see Natalie's car?" Evelyn asked again, turning toward the rest of the table. Custom interior. Imported. Absolutely stunning. Natalie, my younger sister, had become Evelyn's favorite comparison tool over the years. She lived loudly, posted constantly, flaunted every purchase like proof of worth. Evelyn adored that kind of visibility. Ryan pulled out his phone and turned it so everyone could see. "There," he said, tapping the screen. "Look at this." The table leaned in, admiring, commenting, laughing. No one asked how my work was going. No one mentioned the long nights I spent tracing financial records or rebuilding corporate histories line by line. In their world, quiet work didn't count as success. Only visible wealth did. I kept my expression neutral. But inside, a memory surfaced, the moment 3 months earlier when everything began to shift. I had been sitting alone in my home office late one evening, rain tapping steadily against the windows. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of my laptop. That was when the email arrived. No greeting. No signature. Just a subject line. "You should look at your husband's company." At first, I assumed it was spam. My work as a forensic accountant meant I saw plenty of suspicious messages. But something about the attachment made me pause. Curiosity won. I opened the file. Rows of numbers filled the screen, transaction histories, vendor payments, consulting fees. At a glance, it looked ordinary. At a closer look, it didn't. The payments were too consistent, too precise, too frequent. Large amounts transferred repeatedly under vague descriptions. Consulting fees, administrative services, logistics support, all legitimate sounding, none verifiable. I leaned closer to the screen, my pulse slowing into the steady rhythm I felt every time a pattern began to form. One transaction caught my attention. The company receiving the payment, Whitmore Logistics Solutions. The name sounded familiar enough to blend in, but I didn't remember seeing it in any official Whitmore Holdings records before. So I searched. Nothing. No registration records. No operational filings. No physical location tied to the company. Just a name floating in financial space, absorbing money that shouldn't have been there. That was the first moment suspicion replaced curiosity. Back in the dining room, Evelyn's voice snapped me back into the present. "Lauren," she said sweetly, though there was nothing warm behind her eyes. "You've been very quiet tonight." I met her gaze calmly. "I'm listening." Ryan leaned slightly closer, his voice dropping low enough that only I could hear. "Try not to embarrass yourself tonight," he whispered. "Not anger. Not accusation. Just warning." I didn't respond. Instead, I rested my hand lightly against my purse, pressing my fingers against the envelope hidden inside. Months of evidence. Transaction chains. Corporate signatures. Proof layered carefully. Piece by piece. Across the table, the Whitmore family laughed again, unaware that every sound felt distant now, like background noise in a room that no longer held power over me. My eyes drifted toward the far end of the table. The family lawyer sat there, unusually quiet, staring down at his plate. When his gaze lifted briefly, he avoided eye contact with me. That single hesitation told me more than words ever could. They knew something was shifting. They just didn't know how much. Evelyn raised her glass once more. "To family unity," she declared confidently. Everyone echoed her toast. Glasses lifted. Crystal chimed. But beneath the surface, nothing about this moment felt unified anymore. Inside my purse, the envelope pressed firmly against my hand. Across its front, printed in precise black letters, were the words, "To be opened in front of witnesses." And as I watched the people who had spent years measuring my worth by their standards, I understood something with perfect clarity. Tonight was never about proving myself. It was about choosing the exact moment to reveal the truth. The morning after Christmas dinner felt colder than the snow outside. Sunlight poured into the Aspen kitchen, pale and sharp, reflecting off marble counters that looked too perfect to belong to a home where trust had quietly died. I stood at the sink holding a mug of coffee that had long gone cold, watching Ryan move around the kitchen like a stranger wearing my husband's face. He didn't look at me. Not once. His phone rested beside him on the counter, screen facing down. That alone told me everything. Ryan had always been careless with his phone before, leaving it unlocked, scrolling absent-mindedly. Never worried about privacy. Now, every movement felt measured. Controlled. Suspicious. The phone lit up suddenly with a soft buzz. Ryan's hand shot toward it faster than instinct. For half a second, the screen flashed a sender name before he flipped it over. Private Holdings. He cleared his throat, avoiding my gaze. "Morning," he muttered. I nodded slowly. "Morning." Silence stretched between us like thin glass ready to crack. Later that morning, I followed him upstairs, closing the bedroom door behind us. The quiet inside the room felt heavier than any argument. "We need to talk," I said calmly. Ryan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck like I had inconvenienced him. "About what now?" "About the company finances." His eyes hardened instantly. That reaction alone confirmed what I already suspected. "You've been asking strange questions lately," he said, voice tightening. "You don't understand how large businesses operate." "Lauren." There it was. Dismissal. Gaslighting. A familiar pattern wrapped in confident words. "I understand numbers," I replied quietly. "And numbers don't lie." Ryan let out a humorless laugh. "Mom handles most of the financial structure anyway," he added casually, as if tossing the responsibility into someone else's hands would end the conversation. But it didn't. If anything, it made things worse. That afternoon, while Ryan disappeared for what he called work calls, I returned to my laptop. The house was silent again. Too silent. Multiple screens glowed across my desk as I reopened transaction records from the night before. My fingers moved automatically across the keyboard, tracing patterns that had already begun to form in my mind. 3 companies, different names, different locations, but created within the same 12-month period. I searched each listed address, one after another. The results came back identical. Vacant offices, empty buildings, businesses that had never existed beyond paper. My pulse slowed, settling into the steady rhythm I recognized from years of investigative work. That calm meant one thing. The pattern was real, and it was deliberate. Then I saw it. A digital authorization signature attached to one of the shell company filings. Ryan Whitmore. Not forged. Not hidden. His name sat there in perfect clarity. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen as the final piece fell into place. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't oversight. It was design. Hours later, curiosity pushed me into territory I hadn't expected to explore. Property records. Something about the house had always felt off. The mortgage statements never arrived in Ryan's name. Payments came from corporate channels, masked as business expenses. So I searched and found the truth. The Aspen house wasn't owned by Ryan. Not by me. Not by us. It belonged to Whitmore Trust Holdings, managed directly by Evelyn Whitmore. A hollow feeling settled deep inside my chest. Not heartbreak. Not betrayal. Something colder. Realization. This marriage had never been equal. Not legally. Not financially. Not even symbolically. I had been living inside an illusion of partnership. That evening, Evelyn appeared in the living room without warning. She didn't knock. She never did. Her heels clicked softly against the hardwood floor as she approached. Posture straight. Expression calm in a way that made my skin tighten. "You've been asking too many questions lately," she said, her tone smooth but edged with steel. I looked up slowly. "About finances," she added, folding her hands neatly in front of her. That kind of curiosity can create unnecessary chaos. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You married into stability. Lauren," she continued, "you should focus on gratitude, not investigation." There it was. Not a threat. A warning, carefully disguised as advice. Before leaving the room, she paused. "Oh," she added lightly, as if remembering something trivial. "We updated all company passwords last night." Then she walked away, leaving silence behind her, leaving confirmation. They knew. Later that night, alone in my office again, I opened archived legal documents tied to Whitmore family records. My search led me to the family will. At first, I scanned casually, then more carefully. Then again, my name wasn't there. Not once. Not listed as beneficiary. Not listed as secondary. Not listed anywhere. Instead, one name appeared repeatedly. Claire Whitmore, Ryan's sister. Receiving allocation after allocation. Properties. Trusts. Assets. I stared at the screen. My heart beat slow and steady now. Not panic. Not shock. Recognition. I had never been part of their future. Only part of their convenience. The phone rang unexpectedly beside me, breaking the silence. "Unknown number," I answered cautiously. "Lauren Whitmore." The voice was low. "Controlled." "Yes. This is Daniel Cross," the caller said, "former Whitmore family attorney." My pulse sharpened. "I thought you should know," he continued quietly. "If you've started reviewing their finances, you need to be careful." My fingers tightened around the phone. "Why?" I asked. A pause followed. Heavy. Measured. "Because," he said, voice lowering even further, "there are things in those records that could put people in prison." The line went silent, and for the first time, the weight of what I had uncovered settled fully into place. Not suspicion. Not betrayal. Criminal exposure. I returned to my laptop, reopening the transaction logs with new urgency. My eyes scanned through the final chains of transfers, tracing the flow of money from one account to another. Then I saw it. A sequence of offshore transactions. Multiple transfers layered carefully to avoid detection. When combined, the total amount was staggering. The destination account holder appeared at the bottom of the chain. Evelyn Whitmore. My breath slowed. Not fear. Focus. And then one final detail surfaced on the authorization trail. Ryan's approval code. Clear. Undeniable. I leaned back in my chair. The room dark, except for the glow of the screen. This wasn't just family conflict anymore. This was collapse waiting to happen. And when I opened the final document labeled Internal Liquidation Strategy, Phase 2, a quiet certainty settled deep inside me. If this plan moved forward, the Whitmore empire wouldn't just fall. It would take everyone standing beneath it down with it. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't confront Ryan again. Instead, I sat in the dark glow of my office, staring at the screen until the numbers stopped feeling like numbers and started looking like weapons. Outside, snow fell in slow, silent waves, covering everything in white. Inside, something colder settled inside me, a calm I recognized from every investigation I had ever handled. Fear had passed. Now came precision. I created a new folder on my desktop. Protection, personal. Just typing those words felt like drawing a line in the sand. The next morning, while Ryan left early without saying goodbye, I began the quiet process of separating myself from him piece by piece. I opened a new private banking account using credentials only I controlled. I transferred my personal savings, money I had earned, saved, and protected long before I ever married into the Whitmore name. Each click of the keyboard felt deliberate, final, invisible cuts to strings that had bound me longer than I realized. While reviewing my retirement account, I discovered something that made my chest tighten, not from shock, but from confirmation. Ryan had listed himself as the primary beneficiary months earlier. Without telling me, without asking, control had always been his silent language. That same afternoon, after returning to Denver, I scheduled a private meeting with an attorney whose name had come recommended through professional channels. Marcus Hale, financial crimes specialist. His office felt nothing like the Whitmore mansion. No gold accents. No legacy portraits. Just clean lines, neutral colors, and quiet authority. The kind of space where truth mattered more than reputation. I placed the documents carefully across his desk. Transaction logs, shell company registrations, authorization records. He read without interruption, his eyes moving steadily from page to page. The silence stretched long enough to make most people nervous. Not me. I was used to waiting for truth to reveal itself. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "This isn't sloppy accounting," he said calmly. "This is organized concealment." The words didn't shock me. They confirmed what I already knew. "This is bigger than fraud," he added. "Have you told anyone what you found?" "No," I answered. "Good," he said. "Keep it that way." Over the next few days, Marcus and I worked quietly, transforming scattered suspicion into structured evidence. Transaction chains were mapped. Ownership hierarchies were traced. Corporate registrations were verified and cross-linked. Numbers became narratives. Proof became leverage. One evening, while reviewing a newly uncovered file, Marcus paused. "You need to see this." He rotated his screen toward me. At the top of the document, bold lettering read, Phase 2, Asset Migration. My pulse slowed. Not from fear, but from understanding they weren't just hiding money. They were preparing to move everything. Disappearances disguised as restructuring. A few days later, when Ryan insisted we return to Aspen for New Year's gatherings, the atmosphere inside the mansion felt different. Too polite. Too rehearsed. Evelyn greeted me with unusual warmth. Ryan lingered closer than usual. Their behavior felt less like affection and more like surveillance. At dinner, Evelyn made her announcement. "We will be holding a family meeting on New Year's Day," she said calmly. There are important matters to protect. Protect. That word echoed louder than the rest. On New Year's morning, I entered the sitting room where the family lawyer waited beside a polished wooden table. A single stack of documents rested in front of Ryan, and another in front of me. Postnuptial agreement. Even before I opened it, I understood its purpose. Control. Security for them. Not for me. The terms were blunt. If divorce occurred, I would receive nothing. No property. No financial share. No claim to any Whitmore assets. Ryan avoided my eyes. Evelyn watched closely, her expression calm but expectant. "We're protecting the family legacy," she said smoothly. Legacy. Another word for ownership. Another word for exclusion. I scanned the document carefully, noticing the preparation date stamped near the bottom. Weeks before Christmas. This had been planned long before I ever opened that anonymous email. They had already decided my place. Disposable. Temporary. Replaceable. I lifted the pen slowly. Ryan finally looked at me then, uncertainty flickering behind his carefully maintained composure. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, waiting, expecting resistance, expecting emotion. Instead, I signed, smoothly, without hesitation, without argument. Relief spread across Evelyn's face almost instantly. Ryan exhaled quietly, as if tension he never admitted to had finally released. They thought they had secured control. What they didn't know was that my signature had never been surrender. It had been timing, because hours before walking into that room, I had already submitted preliminary documentation to the State Financial Crimes Division, sealed, time-stamped, and protected under legal protocol. That night, alone in the bedroom, my phone vibrated softly against the nightstand. A message from Marcus. They opened the file. 3 words. Simple. Final. I sat in silence, letting their weight settle into my bones. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It wasn't preparation. It was motion. Outside the window, snow continued to fall across the mountains. Quiet and relentless. Inside the house, laughter drifted faintly down the hallway as the Whitmore family celebrated what they believed was victory. But the power had already shifted. They just didn't know it yet. Later that evening, as we gathered once again around the long Christmas table, the air felt thick with artificial warmth. Glasses clinked. Voices rose and fell in familiar patterns. Ryan smirked across from me. Evelyn smiled with quiet satisfaction. They believed everything remained under their control. I rested my hand lightly against my purse again, feeling the envelope waiting inside. Not heavy with fear, heavy with certainty. Then, without warning, the doorbell rang. Sharp. Unexpected. Echoing through the mansion like a signal. And as footsteps approached from the front hallway, I felt something settle deep inside my chest. Not dread. Not hesitation. Recognition. Because I already knew who was standing behind that door. The second ring of the doorbell echoed louder than the first. Conversation at the table faltered. Silverware paused midair. Even the soft Christmas music playing from hidden speakers seemed to shrink into the background. I remained seated, fingers resting lightly against my purse. My breathing slow and steady. Footsteps moved down the hallway. Not hurried. Heavy. Measured. Then the dining room doors opened. 2 federal investigators stepped inside, followed by several others. Their presence filled the room with a kind of authority that didn't need to raise its voice. Dark coats. Official folders. Expressions carved from calm certainty. "Is Evelyn Whitmore present?" the lead investigator asked. Silence answered him first. Then Evelyn stood slowly from her chair, her elegant posture still intact, though I noticed the faint tightening at the corners of her mouth. "Yes," she said, her voice controlled. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" The investigator stepped forward and produced a document. "Ma'am, we have a federal search and seizure warrant connected to an ongoing financial investigation." The words landed like stones dropped into water, quiet, but impossible to ignore. Ryan turned toward me sharply, confusion flashing across his face. Around the table, whispers began. Fear spread faster than anger. The investigator began reading the charges aloud: financial fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, corporate concealment. Each accusation echoed through the room that had mocked me only hours before. Evelyn protested immediately. "This is a mistake," she snapped. "There must be some misunderstanding." But her voice carried a tremor now, small but unmistakable. Ryan's chair scraped against the floor as he stood, his face pale. Then he turned to me. "You did this?" he asked, disbelief cracking through his voice. I met his gaze calmly. "I didn't destroy anything," I said quietly. I revealed what was already broken. The room felt smaller as the investigators continued their work. One of them listed offshore account numbers I had traced months ago in silence while this family laughed at my worth. Ryan stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Or maybe, for the first time, seeing the truth. I reached into my purse and removed the sealed envelope. The paper felt lighter now than it ever had before. I handed it to the investigator without hesitation. Inside were the records, transaction trails, signed approvals, proof layered carefully until denial was no longer possible. Evelyn stopped speaking, stopped arguing, stopped pretending, because she understood exactly what that envelope contained. Agents stepped toward her, voices calm but firm, guiding her away from the table she had ruled for years. Christmas lights still glowed along the walls, reflecting off polished ornaments as power shifted in silence. Ryan remained frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. For once, no one laughed. Outside, the cold night air wrapped around me as I stepped through the front doors of the mansion. Snow drifted gently from the sky, settling across the driveway like a clean slate. The door closed behind me with a quiet finality. Not a slam, not anger, just an ending. My phone buzzed softly in my coat pocket. "Marcus, it's over," the message read. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the sharp winter air, feeling something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Freedom. Not because I destroyed them, but because I stopped allowing myself to be controlled by them. Success, I realized, was never about approval or appearances. It wasn't about cars or houses or proving my worth at someone else's table. It was about truth, about dignity, about knowing exactly when to stay silent and when to speak. Snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked forward. Away from the glowing mansion behind me, I didn't turn around. There was nothing left there for me to reclaim. Some people think revenge is loud, but the most powerful kind is quiet. It waits, it prepares, and when the moment finally arrives, it speaks with certainty instead of anger. If you've ever been made to feel small at your own family table, if you've ever been judged before anyone truly understood your strength, tell me, what would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent? Or waited for the perfect moment to reveal the truth? And if stories like this remind you that strength doesn't always shout, sometimes it waits, stay here with me. There are more stories of quiet power, family betrayal, and justice finding its way, and I'd love for you to be here when the next one begins.